The editorial pages are not usually where you turn to get the latest breaking news. But in the case of the Washington Post during the Trump era, that has often turned out to be the case. As I mentioned at the top of the show tonight, we've seen the Post in its editorials and columns break huge stories. The news of Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn secretly talking to the Russian government about sanctions, a key early revelation in the whole Trump-Russia scandal and something that may yet put Flynn in prison. That was a David Ignatius column in January 2017. We've also seen the Post just a few weeks ago in an editorial break the news about President Trump delaying military aid to Ukraine to make them give him dirt on Joe Biden, the exact plot that has now led to these very serious impeachment proceedings against the president. Well, now, as the impeachment proceedings go forward on very serious footing, the Washington Post editorial page appears to have done it again. Once again, it's from columnist David Ignatius, and we've got something new here. In his latest column, Ignatius raises the prospect that this scheme that's currently at the center of the House's impeachment investigation may have been round two for President Trump and Ukraine. He may have done this exact thing once before with Ukraine, before he did it this time and got caught. Before Volodymyr Zelensky was elected president, the president of Ukraine was this man, Petro Poroshenko. According to David Ignatius today, in 2017, after Trump was elected, in January of 2017, Poroshenko's government hired an expensive lobbying firm in Washington to try to give Poroshenko and his new government better contacts with the new American administration. They were paying to try to get into the White House. They wanted to make contacts with the new Trump folks. According to David Ignatius, it wasn't working. Quote, Ukraine had hired the lobbying firm BGR Group in January 2017 to foster contact with Trump, but nothing had happened. But then suddenly, 6 months down the road, in June 2017, Ignatius says, quote, the door opened. Why? Well, here's something we didn't know before. On June 7th, Rudy Giuliani visited Ukraine, visited Kiev. He was there giving a speech, and while he was there, he met with President Poroshenko and Poroshenko's main prosecutor. And who knows what was said at that meeting. But within a couple of days, for some strange reason, within a couple of days of that meeting, Ukraine's then ongoing criminal investigations of Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort got dropped. Paul Manafort was under investigation in Ukraine for having taken millions of dollars in illicit off-the-books payments from a pro-Kremlin political party and for his connection to that pro-Kremlin political party, basically looting the Ukrainian government for themselves when they were in charge. I mean, that was Ukraine's money that went up the chimney with those guys. And so it was Ukraine's anti-corruption prosecutors who were looking hard at Paul Manafort at that time in mid-2017. As part of their investigations of Manafort, we believe those Ukrainian anti-corruption prosecutors were cooperating with the domestic investigation of Paul Manafort here at home, the one that was part of the special counsel's investigation. It would ultimately result in Manafort's prosecution and his imprisonment on multiple felony counts. So Ukraine's got these open investigations of Manafort. And then mysteriously, within a couple days of Giuliani visiting and meeting with the president of Ukraine and his top prosecutor, within a couple of days of that meeting, the Manafort cases get taken away from the anti-corruption guys and moved to be basically under the purview of the president. And people in Ukraine were mad about this. This was the headline in the Kiev Post when it happened. This is their headline basically a week after Giuliani was there meeting with Ukraine's president. Quote, Black Ledger investigation appears to come to a halt. Quote, after a year of investigation by Ukrainian law enforcement, the case of the Black Ledger, a secret handwritten list of $2 billion in shady payments by the political party of ousted Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, appears to have stalled. When reports of the finding of the ledger first surfaced last year, the scandal led to the resignation of the chairman of Donald Trump's presidential election campaign team, Paul Manafort, whose name was found in the ledger next to the sums of hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine has now passed the Black Ledger documents to the Special Investigations Department of the Prosecutor General's Office. And of course, I mean, different prosecutors' offices, we don't know. I mean, from here, how do we know how to judge the various equities or proprieties of the different types of prosecutors' offices in some foreign country? We don't know, but they do. As David Ignatius points out, a former senior security official in Ukraine was quoted at the time explaining what exactly it meant that these Manafort prosecutions were moved from the anti-corruption folks to this other office under the president. Quote, the fact that the Black Ledger case was passed to the Prosecutor General's office means it will from now on be under political control, he said. He said, quote, it is clear for me that somebody gave an order to bury the Black Ledger. And then, presto. Interesting. Rudy gets his meeting, Manafort cases get dropped, get buried, and then less than a week later, the Ukrainian president gets his White House meeting. The one that the Ukrainian presidency has been trying for fruitlessly for months. It instantly comes through as soon as those Manafort cases are shelved. Right? So the new administration is sworn in here. Ukrainians can't get anywhere with the new administration. Giuliani goes over there, meets with the president and the prosecutor. Within a week, I mean, actually, the Kiev Post says it is within 2 days of that Giuliani meeting, the Paul Manafort cases get put under political control. They get disappeared in Ukraine, along with any help that Ukrainian prosecutors might have been providing to U.S. prosecutors, the special counsel's office, right? Which was right then gearing up to charge Manafort with multiple felonies as part of Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation. That all goes away right after the Giuliani meeting. And within 2 weeks of the Giuliani meeting and the submarining of the Manafort cases, presto, the Ukrainian president gets his White House meeting that he couldn't get anywhere near for months before then. Again, this is new from Washington Post columnist David Ignatius, the reporter who broke the Mike Flynn talking to the Russians story back in January 2017 before anybody else. This is Ignatius writing on the editorial page that broke the Ukraine scandal that has now led to impeachment proceedings against the president. And here he argues that it looks like this may have been round two. You know, President Trump working with Rudy Giuliani, the extortion of the government of Ukraine, getting them to do things to help Trump in exchange for something that country desperately wanted and needed from the U.S. government. And just one last point on this. You might remember that last year, there was a New York Times report. It was last May, but we've actually talked about it in the last couple of months here on the show. It was a report from the New York Times last May, which suggested that when Ukraine dropped those Manafort cases and they stopped helping the special counsel's office here with their own investigation of Manafort, the Times is reporting suggested last year that when they shelved those Manafort cases, Ukrainians were not only, in the words of one Ukrainian lawyer, doing that in an effort to, quote, avoid irritating the top American officials. They were also doing it, they believed, because they were trying to secure the delivery of Javelin missiles from the United States that they wanted to use in their war against Russia. The Ukraine government, for some reason, appears to have believed at that time that dropping the cases against Manafort would not only avoid irritating top U.S. officials, it would also facilitate the delivery of those missiles from the U.S. government. Well, in the end, they did kill the Manafort cases. They did stop helping the special counsel here when they were looking into Manafort. After doing so, they all of a sudden, we now know, did get their White House meeting for their president that they previously couldn't get. And they did finally get the delivery of those Javelin missiles that they previously couldn't get. And Rudy Giuliani was taking meetings in Ukraine and talking to the president of that country and its prosecutors all through the middle of that. I mean, does that sound familiar or what? Was that round one? Was that the dress rehearsal for how to extort stuff to help Trump out of Ukraine? And they got away with it in 2017. And when they tried to get away with it again this year, too many people saw them and squawked. I mean, is the reason that Trump thought this was a perfect call and this was all fine is because he'd done it before and gotten away with it, so he thought it was legal? This question is now being raised by a well-connected columnist writing on a piece of journalistic real estate that has broken a lot of these kinds of stories already. And I will just tell you one final point about it. It kind of looks like the impeachment investigators on Capitol Hill may be onto this already. And I'm saying that based on one little tiny short piece of tape. Just watch this. This is Congressman Jerry Connolly. He's a senior member of the Oversight Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, coming out of the sealed hearing room where they've been taking these closed-door depositions for weeks now. This is him this week on Wednesday. He's popping his head out in the middle of these closed-door depositions. And he basically gives reporters a hint as to where some of this might be going. He says it to them first off camera, and as best as we can tell, the reporters can't quite believe it, or they at least want to get him on the record about it. So they ask Connolly to please repeat it. Please say it again, this time on camera, so that they've got him on camera and on the record. Watch what he tells them.
Do you want to speak on camera briefly, just what you told them?
If I were an enterprising reporter, I would spend a little time on the issue of Javelin missiles.
Why? Why?
Be an enterprising reporter. Yes. What?
If I were an enterprising reporter, I would spend a little time on the issue of Javelin missiles. He said, okay. Agreed. Agreed. Here we go. Now watch this space.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.